Hi, this is Amber Burbrink presenting my Social Injustice PowerPoint for AEP 855 spring semester. Social injustice relates to the unfairness or injustice of our society on its divisions of rewards and burdens and other incidental inequalities. Social injustices arise when the distribution of advantages and disadvantages in society aren't equal. Social injustice is caused by certain barriers. Major barriers include disproportionate wealth distribution relative to labor, prejudice, discrimination, racism, stereotyping, and sexism, to name a few. So my question that I need to focus on in my area of concentration, which is my role as a reading specialist in a kindergarten through 5th grade classroom, is why can't these kids read? I believe by examining several articles from professionals in the field of educational leadership and research, I have identified some of the root causes for reading struggles based on the social injustices I mentioned earlier, and have made connections between what is happening and what I need to make happen within my classroom. Historically, minority groups, women, and the poor have been treated differently in our country. Minorities and women had to fight for their rights to vote and be treated equally. The poor have been looked down upon as bad decision makers and lesser people. Is this true in education as well? Let's take a look at what research has to say about the social injustices that minority groups, girls, and our lower SES students face in public schools today. Carolyn Shield's article from Education Administration Quarterly, she talks in her abstract about how educators need to critically examine ways in which the status quo marginalizes large numbers of students and their families. She goes on to point out that educational leadership is widely recognized as complex and challenging, and everybody wants to blame somebody for the problems that we're having, be it the school boards, some people want to blame the teachers, our democratic government, principals and administrators. Everybody wants to blame somebody. Society wants to blame someone. So, when in reality, we need to take a look at the root causes of the low achievement and work from there. So, as I just stated, the blame game. Everyone wants to play it. I've been guilty of it myself. We look at a student who gets free and reduced lunches and tell ourselves, I'll do my best, but let's look at the kid's home life. How much impact am I really going to have? However, one of the most critical points that Shields brings out in her article is that we as educators, those of us with boots on the ground, so to speak, need to value that students' life experiences are important and encourage them to bring them to the discussions, even if they're not considered the norm by our standards. When students can connect learning at school to their personal lives, it makes the needed connection for students to understand the curriculum and relate it to their situations, therefore making it more meaningful. We expect children to live in our world of academia when in reality they're wondering what's going on at home. Is the water running? Does dad still have a job? Educators need to find ways to make learning applicable and relatable for all students, especially those of a lower SES. Building genuine relationships, including their situations and the daily things that they feel, are relevant, and helping students make connections between their home lives and their school lives is one step towards rectifying the social injustices students of a lower SES class feel. What does it mean to say that you're colorblind? If you ask that question of Caucasian students, it means that they do not see the differences in color or race. They're tolerant of all people. They treat everyone alike. Non-Caucasian students say, "What are you missing?" They will explain that when others ignore obvious differences in appearance, it is likely they are also ignoring more fundamental differences in worldview, culture, religion, and traditions. Other researchers have reported similar findings. Taylor, for example, reported that white girls in her study were confused by questions about race and made comments like, "I think whites and blacks are just people." An educational framework for social justice must value, rather than ignore, diversity. When teachers and administrators protest that they are colorblind, that we are all members of the human race and therefore all the same, they're actually denying the very differences that were the reason behind the statements in the first place. Being colorblind is a practice that only white people have the luxury of believing. As teachers, we need to embrace the differences in color and race. We need to acknowledge and celebrate traditions and customs of every student. Again, making personal connections with students and helping them make connections between their home and school lives will make learning more meaningful for our students and close the achievement gaps we're worried about. For me specifically, it means thinking outside of the basal box and incorporating, even highlighting rich, diverse literature from other cultures, looking at folk and fairy tales from around the world, and other literature that shows other cultures as the hero rather than the villain. We've always looked at the differences between the way boys and girls learn. Historically, girls have been the housewives and the mothers, and the boys have been the breadwinners, so the educational expectations have been different, shorting both genders. In today's world, we know that these gender roles have been incredibly altered, and both genders can be expected to excel at raising children, caring for the home, and earning a decent living. So what are we going to do in schools to ensure equal educational opportunities for both boys and girls? In our classrooms, we need to be showing examples of both genders crossing the more traditional expected boundaries and excelling in areas not traditionally accepted. We also need to utilize literature where the housewife is really the dad, or where the mom has a great job and dad is more domestic. Also, encouraging students to talk about their own family situations, what their parents do for a living, their levels of education, and goals that students have. So recognizing that social injustice such as poverty, treatment of the races, and gender bias are ever present in our classrooms today, what am I going to do about it? As all of the researchers have pointed out, the place to start is with me. I need to consciously recognize and plan for these differences in my classroom and encourage discussions about our differences as well as our similarities. I need to look for ways to incorporate understanding and different points of view and celebrate differences instead of looking at them as hurdles to overcome. I also need to be sure that my lessons and materials choices show a varied perspective of what is considered normal. And finally, most importantly, get to know the students, make personal connections, and build rapport. Set the tone in the classroom as one of a safe discussion and acceptance. These will be my primary goals for my next school year.